Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Today we welcome David Shipley here to discuss his new book, Send, The Essential Guide to Email for Office and Home. And while it's truly being acclaimed as the Strunken White for the email world, I have read the entire thing, and I can honestly tell you it is much more entertaining than that Office staple, but just as definitive and helpful. Let me be clear, David Shipley and Will Schwalb are not anti-email Luddites at all. In fact, they, like all of us, embrace email for many, many reasons. Their goal is simply to make our email communications more effective, to save us from common email mistakes, and to eliminate unnecessary email, my favorite part. They dissect each part of an email and show us very real examples of grievous mistakes of tone and word choice, and the many, many ways email can go so terribly wrong. You can see more examples of these train wreck emails on their website, which is thinkbeforeyouclick.com, and they actually have a hall of shame of emails from both, and they're all real, right? They're all absolutely true.
Real, and they're flowing in. We got one from a soldier in Iraq who had a reply all disaster with his commanding officer. Because horrible things ensued.
Yeah, it's awesome. This is a necessary and important conversation for everyone who uses email today, and I am thrilled that we have David here to help us talk about it. David Shipley is the Deputy Editorial Director and Op-Ed Page Editor of the New York Times, where he has also served as National Enterprise Editor and Senior Editor of the New York Times Magazine. Previous to this, he was Executive Director of the New Republic and a Senior Presidential Speechwriter for the Clinton administration. So please join me in welcoming David Shipley to Microsoft Research.
Thank you, Kim. I think I'm mic'd, right? Yep. Great. I'm just so pleased to be here. I mean, coming to Microsoft to talk about email is like going to Graceland if you're an Elvis fan. So, yeah, I was telling Kim, the last time I was here was about 10 years ago when Mike Kinsley was in the process of starting up Slate, and I had the great good fortune of going through the challenging Microsoft interview process, and I still remember it. Thankfully things worked out. I was offered the job, but it didn't work out for other reasons. Anyway, so I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm going to talk about the book my friend Will and I wrote about email, why we continue to make so many mistakes on it, and what we can do to improve our email behavior and make the world a better place. Then I hope we can have a conversation, and I imagine everyone in this room brings a special expertise to the topic, and I'd really love to hear your thoughts. But before I do that, I thought I'd show you a brief instructional video. And, you know, you might want to pay special attention to the section on hygiene here. And we will maximize the screen and click play. And maybe we'll put down the lights. I don't know if you need to.
What I hate about email, the first thing that definitely comes to mind would be all the emails I get from Viagra and other sexual enhancement companies.
I like email because I hate the phone and I hate having to deal with actual people.
Oh, the smiley things, the little smiley faces. Oh, that's annoying. The smiley faces. Oh.
Stupid jokes. That drives me insane. One of those, like, forward this to like 10 people, or 2 million people will die somewhere, or something crazy like that. I'm just like, dude, come on.
You can be in touch with people from all around the world in a split second, and that is incredible. You know, you send off an email and it's instantly gratifying.
The thing I love about emails is that it's efficient. Like, you can connect with 10 to 20 people at the same time.
I'm better about my emails than I am about my cell phone, actually. I mean, emails are actually the easiest way to get in touch with me.
If you have to end a relationship, well, lost it on the phone.
End a relationship.
Type that out.
Lots of experience with that.
Let it happen by email. The quicker you get the information, the better your life will be. And maybe that's the kind of secondary information that only email can deliver.
I happen to be dating someone right now who, like, just fires off these one-liner emails, like, as his response to, like, he's never written me an email that's more than 2 lines long. And I really feel like it's a communication. Like, I want people to take their time and write, and, you know, I mean, it's different if you're just making plans or something.
I hate when people do not respond to an email, when they don't respond to it, or they ignore it, or they don't respond to it in a timely fashion, because to me, if I email you with a question, I want a response. And I consider email another form of dialogue or conversation, and if I was talking to you live and you just didn't respond and walked away, that to me would be equatable with not responding to an email. I just think it's rude and it's poor etiquette. So I hate poor email etiquette.
A lot of times people send emails just to show that they are proactive, but that does not necessarily mean that they are really proactive. I think sometimes emails can create crisis makers.
You get this 25-paragraph email, and you look at it and you say, damn, I gotta read this? I gotta read this whole thing. It's gonna take me a half hour to read. Just get to the point.
My freshman year in baseball, when I hadn't, I guess, come to terms with how to use email to the fullest extent, there's two different lines of emails that go out, one to the coach and the entire team, and one to just the entire team. And I said not some nice stuff about the coach in an email that was supposed to be to one of my friends, but ended up actually going to the coach. So that wasn't very good. But luckily the coach he stepped down the next year, so I didn't have to deal with it.
I manage a group of guys, and there was a time when I got an email from my immediate supervisor asking me to can 3 of the guys that I managed. And it really was just like, they're not performing, can them, and that was it. It was a very cold, impersonal sort of command, you know, like off with their heads, and it was like sent off, and I was like, wow, that sucks. Maybe you could have talked to me and figured it out and at least discuss, because I got to tell this person you're out of a job, but I don't really have any kind of like reasons to give them or anything like that. I'm just like, yeah, I got an email, you're out, see you, bye. So that was terrible. I thought that was kind of like really awful. And again, that goes back to the fact that you can't really emote in an email. You can't really show any kind of compassion, happiness, or anything like that. It's just do this, or hey, there's nothing in there. It's very dry. It's like IM or MSN. You know, it's good for a while, but for some things, I still think you need that human touch, the voice, or the face, or whatever.
Here, send. Okay.
So, as you can see, this was filmed in New York City. These are real people. Real people, actually, who signed extensive legal releases, unbelievably. But all of them made clear that email was part of their lives, and all of them made clear that they couldn't live without email. And yet none of them expressed any degree of confidence in their ability to email effectively in every situation. Now, I think everybody in this room especially knows that email isn't always the dominant form of social communication. IM, dodgeball, real-time technologies are increasingly vital. But it's still the dominant form of electronic communication for the business world. And it's an important form of social communication. So when you screw up, what's at stake is everything from your friendships to your career. Will and I, my co-author, came to this realization long before our friends in the Justice Department, or those folks at Walmart, or that CEO at Starwood, or the one at Boeing before him. And this book, in fact, grew out of personal experience. The sense that we were screwing up too much on email, the realization that we're spending too much time divining the meaning of or responding to bad emails. And all this prompted Will and me to embark on our digital odyssey. From the get-go, we weren't just trying to understand disastrous emails, like the ones that Michael Brown, the FEMA director, sent during the very worst days of Katrina. The one about being a fashion god, or the one about looking for a dog sitter, and I think there was even one about Nordstrom's. Anyway, we were looking for insight into everyday screw-ups. Emails that are too formal or too casual, too angry or too sarcastic, too vague, or just plain unnecessary. The sins we most often commit, and which are most often committed against us. Like, well, I actually have one here from our own personal files. but we need a volunteer. No vaccinations, no humiliation, I promise. Would you like to come up for the reading?
Yep.
Oh, so one day, Will and I received an email from our editor. We'll call him Marty, which actually happens to be his name. But anyway, Marty's email went like this.
One for the book.
So the body of the email contained an anecdote, the story of a mortifying exchange Marty had had with a colleague. So how did we respond? I took the email at face value and simply thanked Marty for the contribution. I wrote, "Dear Marty, thanks for the anecdote. This will fit right in. All best, David." And I copied Will on my answer. But he had a very different reaction to Marty's email. He thought Marty was really asking for a progress report and that this was a subtle way of reminding us, without pushing explicitly, that he was out there waiting for us to give him something. He thought it was kind of a hello, remember me message, and the appropriate and expected reply from us was an email letting him know how close we were to delivering the book. So Will started to compose an email. As it turns out, and I will even say this with Will not in the room, he was entirely right. Because before we could formulate another reply, we received another email from Marty. This one said, in part,
I would love to see a portion of the manuscript to show my colleagues at an upcoming meeting.
So, what did we do? Well, we behaved like lunatics. We panicked, and then we did nothing. Days went by. Finally, we composed the following absolute travesty of an email. Subject, one for the book. To Marty, from Shipley Schwalbe. Dear Marty, this is really horrible, but I guess I have to read it. Thanks so much for yours. The writing is going well, but we're not quite there yet. We really want to get you something for your upcoming meeting, but we're not totally sure we can do it in time. We're wondering how much of the manuscript you need and the last date we can get it to you. Is there a part of the manuscript you're particularly interested in having? We have a complete first draft, which was a minor stretch of the truth, but some parts are more polished than others. Perhaps we can talk next week so we can let you know where we are at and discuss how to proceed. All best, Will and David. Nice, right? Should have cleared everything up. Here is Marty's reply, number 3.
I'm going on vacation. Let's talk when I return.
Okay, so what exactly did this mean? We're going to now ask our helpful volunteer for 2 readings of the line. Reading number 1.
I'm going on vacation. Let's talk when I return.
Okay, so beautifully done. It's the one that I had hoped to hear. If this was the correct interpretation, Marty was saying that there wasn't a problem here, that we could talk when he got back, that great art takes time, the creative process, unfolds at its own rhythm, and so on. Or was he saying,
I'm going on vacation. Let's talk when I return.
Yeah, I still get chills hearing that. I mean, if this was the tone, thank you very much. If this was the tone that went with the sentence, then the sentiment was very different. This would mean he was saying he was fed up with us and needed a week's holiday to cool down sufficiently before he could deal with us and not explode and, God forbid, cancel our contract. This tortured interaction brought us face to face with 2 of email's stealthiest characteristics, both of which are alluded to in the video we saw. First, email is an affectless medium. It was possible for us to read Marty's email any number of ways. Email's inherent absence of tone encourages misunderstanding. Readers project all their fears into the simplest of sentences, sometimes with just cause, and sometimes without. Second, email can be an enormous time waster because of its ability to simulate forward motion when none is taking place. After all, our long email to Marty was really meant to buy us time while creating the illusion that we were responding constructively. There's an absolutely fantastic quote from Bob Geldof, the humanitarian rock musician. We know he should be known for lots of things, but we think he should be known most of all for this piece of wisdom. Quote, email is dangerous because it gives us a feeling of action even when nothing is happening. So the point of this little story is exactly that. It is a little story. It's not a catastrophe. No people were hurt. Nothing was broken. No one lost his job, a friend, they're cool. But there's a toll to this kind of bad emailing. It saps our energy and our time, and those are two pretty valuable commodities. So what's going on? Why do we email so badly? Well, Will and I, after a year of in-depth study, boiled it down to 6 reasons. First, the curse of the new. Many of you have been emailing for a good long while now, but in terms of human history, email is brand new. And like all new toys, we tend to use it too much. And we use it inappropriately, like to fire people. Here's the verbatim text of an email Radio Shack sent to 400 employees, now former employees, last year. Quote, "The workforce reduction notification is currently in progress. Unfortunately, your position is one that has been eliminated." Nice. So that's the first thing. Bad email happens when you use email for something that should have been done in person. Apologies, anything with huge emotional valence. Second, as I mentioned earlier, if you don't consciously insert tone into an email, a kind of universal default tone won't automatically be conveyed. People forget this. For this reason, email demands that we figure out who we are in relation to the person we are writing and that we adjust the tone accordingly. Something that's confusing and hard to remember with a technology that, one, completely flattens the world, breaks down hierarchies, and suddenly makes everyone available. One example, when we were researching the book, we spoke with the Dean of Admissions at Harvard, who ran through a list of the wildly informal salutations he receives, hi, hey, hiya, from applicants. Third, email is fast, often too fast to keep up with. And yet we're in the position of having to get our messages right, tone, content, spelling, dozens or even hundreds of times a day, and often under intense pressure. What's more, email's growing reach means that people who didn't necessarily have to write now have to put their ideas and thoughts and responses down in words, and those are words that you have to decipher. Speed, of course, encourages sloppiness, and that in turn can cause problems because words, no matter where we use them, carry meaning. A friend of ours actually was embroiled in a huge office flame war recently, and it threatened to engulf her whole department. No work was being done. People were spending all day firing off angry missives. And so she stepped in and spoke to everyone, offline, I might add, which was an incredibly wise choice, and she calmed everyone down. And then she sent one final email to the people involved, and it said, "Are there any problems remaining regarding this matter?" And one of the chief combatants meant to write back, "No, period, full stop, thanks to you." Well, he forgot the period. And the email went to the entire group as, "No thanks to you," and the flame war started again. Fourth, you would have thought that we would have learned by now. It just boggles the mind. Fourth, in face-to-face or voice-to-voice conversation, our emotional brains are constantly monitoring the reactions of the person to whom we're speaking. Email, sadly, offers no such real-time channel for feedback. Unfortunately, the technology, maybe because it's happening so fast, somehow lulls us into thinking that such a channel exists. I think I'm talking to you, but really I'm talking to my computer, or to you via my computer. Dan Goleman, the science writer and the author of Emotional Intelligence, told us that email puts people, in neurological terms, in a state of disinhibition. Another word might be cluelessness. Fifth, email doesn't just make it easier for us to lose our cool, it actually eggs us on. On email, as you probably know, people aren't quite themselves. Protected by the screen, they can be angrier, less sympathetic, less aware, more easily wounded, even more gossipy and duplicitous. Email has a tendency to encourage the lesser angels of our nature. Combine this with that easy-to-hit send key, and you have a problem. There's this really interesting study that sheds light on this that was brought to our attention by Dan Gilbert, who's a professor of psychology at Harvard and author of Stumbling on Happiness. And I'm going to read what he wrote, because I'm quoting directly from him. At University College in London, pairs of volunteers were hooked up to a mechanical device that allowed each of them to exert pressure on the other volunteer's fingers. The researcher began the game by exerting a fixed amount of pressure on the first volunteer's finger. The first volunteer was then asked to exert precisely the same amount of pressure on the second volunteer's finger. The second volunteer was then asked to exert the same amount of pressure on the first volunteer's finger, and so on. So the two volunteers took turns applying equal amounts of pressure to each other's fingers while the researchers measured the actual amount of pressure they applied. And the results were striking. Although volunteers tried to respond to each other's touches with equal force, they typically responded with about 40% more force than they had just experienced. So each time a volunteer was touched, he touched back harder, which led the other volunteer to touch back even harder. This despite the fact that each volunteer was convinced that he was responding with equal force and that for some reason the other person was escalating. Sound like a flame war? Sixth, what works in speech and even in letters comes out differently on email. Contractions. Contract a word in a letter and you're sloppy. Fail to contract on emails and you're stuffy. Or take the word please. You know, one of the nicest, most wonderful words in the English language, something we've taught from a very early age not to leave behind. Common sense might tell you that adding please to an email will always make it more polite. And common sense would be wrong. A spoken please is considerate. An emailed please runs the risk of coming across as hectoring. Would you please remember to include me on the email whenever you respond to him conveys a sense of exasperation. You've been told this before, it says. Why can't you remember it? Strangely, we found almost universal agreement that the abbreviation PLS, or PULS, doesn't seem to convey this frosty tone, although obviously it can only be used in informal communication. So those are the whys. We also found a set number of ways we email badly. And as I will get into those, we'll show one more piece of video. There are, of course, mistakes like these. Let me get this going.
And do you have anything, any embarrassing thing that you've ever done with email?
Yes. So this is it's so awful. It's the most awful thing that's ever happened to me. So here at work, I manage this mailing list for this campaign that we do to try to overturn a section of the Patriot Act. And that mailing list contains probably, at the time it probably contained about 38,000 people. And we got this new like mass mailing software to use so that we could send out, you know, one message to everyone, like just with the click of a button, instead of sending out like batches of hundreds, and it would take forever. So this was really great. So we got the software, I put it on my computer, I'm trying it out. And of course, like in typical form, I don't really read the directions or anything. I'm kind of like, oh, I'll just figure it out. You know, it's just easy email software. So I send out this test message to Anna and Larry, who are my cohorts here, that is basically just like a joke message saying we're all liberal weenies, because there are a lot of people on our email list who are like kind of hate how liberal we are. There's sort of a lot of like libertarians and conservatives who have the common interest of wanting to overturn a lot of the Patriot Act, but don't necessarily share our politics. So it was just a kind of joking around message to make sure that it worked. I sent it to them, I went home, and then the next day I get in and it turns out that that message has gone out to all 38,000 people on the mailing list. And probably like 200 people have written back with total confusion saying, what the hell is this? Like, what is this message? Is there some kind of mistake? I said something like, hope you all get this. Like, click here if this works. And of course the links don't work because it was a joke message and whatever. So then I had to send out all these sort of people. Oh, and it turned out that people thought that like we'd been hacked or something, which was great. Like they didn't actually think that we would do something so stupid, that the system had been hacked and that, you know, some hacker had sent out some fake message. So that was good. And actually it turned out that most people were pretty understanding when I sent out an apology message. But literally I came in and I saw that this had happened. I don't think you were here, were you? I don't know.
I don't know where I was, but...
But I came in, I saw that it had happened, and I wept. Like, I wept openly. And I just felt like I wanted to get up and leave this office and never come back ever again. So that was the worst thing. And then from then on, I had like email fear. Like I couldn't send out an email to more than one person without being afraid of like what was going to happen. I was traumatized for a very long time, which isn't good because that's sort of my main job here is that I manage different managers.
How did you get over it?
I think just time and laughing about it and the fact that nobody actually really got mad at me. Like my boss thought it was the funniest thing that had ever happened. And I don't think that my boss, Mike, knew about it actually until the other night when I brought it up. But now I just think it's funny, but it was really like the most traumatizing thing.
Oh, she came to our book party. She had no idea that that the world is seeing this, but she was a great sport about it. You know, we've all done things along these lines, and you know, the only lesson of her story, her name is Bridget, is to try not to do it. I mean, it really is the equivalent of, you know, walking across the lawn and stepping on a rake and getting hit in the head. But there are more vexing traps, ones that we hope are more within our control. I'm going to call these the 8 deadly sins of email, and I know we love to number things and it sort of borders on OCD, but I don't think it's anything we can't handle. And these are just the deadly sins. There are a lot of minor transgressions. Pardon me? Oh, obsessive compulsive disorder, where you have to just number lots of things and bring as much order to a disordered world as possible. So here are the big 8. The first deadly sin, the email that's unbelievably vague. We simply don't take into account the amount of time wasted when we send emails that are imprecise, when we send emails that do not precisely express what we want. Where's Bill? Well, probably not the best example here, but for most of the rest of us, Bill who? And what do you want him for? And do you want to talk to him? And is it urgent? And should he call you or text you or come find you? And if so, where are you? Or are you just curious? No action needed. I mean, this simple question can eat up 6 or 7 rounds of emails. Now imagine it was addressed to a few people. So not only is one person not sure what to do, many are. And they aren't even sure who is supposed to be doing or not doing whatever it is they're maybe supposed to be doing. Maddening. Second deadly sin. The email that insults you so badly that you have to get up from your desk. This happens a lot. Here's one email a friend of ours, a well-known figure in the publishing world, received from a famous author. We'll call our friend Anne. I'll read it. Anne, from what planet do you reside? Do you intentionally act ignorant to your own manufacture of reality? How can you be entitled to anything when you have no contract, that's in caps, with me? Is your job in jeopardy? Is your firm's financial position at such an all-time low that there's a need to leech off me yet again? Do the words bad business practices even remotely reach some level of your intelligence, ethics, ? For a very long time, I've wondered just what it was that upset me regarding my dealings with your firm. I finally realized it via your email. Presumptuous, with exclamation mark. Do you know what the word means? Please refrain from contacting me directly. Oh, and that carried with it a whole host of CCs. Remember what Dan Goleman had to say. And I could really go on all day about rhetorical questions and how insidious they are, but I'll get back to the list. Third deadly sin, the email that's cowardly. Email encourages cowardice. You can drop bombs, do and say horrible things, fire 400 Radio Shack employees, all while safely shielded by your computer terminal. And emoticons do not soften the blow. An emoticon would not have saved Don Imus. Probably most cowardly is an email like the one cited above, where people thought it was appropriate to fire someone by email, but there are more garden variety cowardly email acts we all commit. That really bad piece of news. Send it Friday afternoon, and you can not only ruin someone's weekend, but guarantee that you won't have to deal with the problem for a few more days. Actually, with the growth of handhelds, it's not just Friday afternoons. Bad news can come to us on weekends when we're checking email before going to bed, just about any time, which is one more reason to be ever mindful of when you send something. Also cowardly, the forwarding of someone's moronic email to someone else with a snarky comment. In a classic karma's a beautiful kind of way, though, this is exactly the kind of email that you are likely to accidentally send back to the person you are mocking. Fourth deadly sin, the email that puts you in jail. Even really intelligent people seem to forget that email is permanent and searchable, which means that it's probably best to follow the maxim set forth by New York's new governor, Eliot Spitzer, who wrote the following about email. Never talk when you can nod, never write when you can talk. My only addendum is never put it in an email. He's governor now, so must be doing something right. Sadly, this is still news to a lot of people. Frank Quattrone, whose time to clean the files before the investigators get here email, put him in jail. Or Mark Foley, the Florida congressman who seemed to think that IMs couldn't be printed out. Here are actually, this was a fun part of our research, here are some actual emails that have wound up in court, put people in jail, and cost companies lots of money. Delete this email. Do not tell Joe. Can we get away with it? They'll never find out. I have serious concerns. And my personal favorite, this might not be legal. Fifth, the email that won't go away. I'll make this very simple, though I'm not sure that you need this bit of advice. You can and should thank someone for a favor. They can thank you for your thank you, but you can't thank them for their thank you for your thank you. We have to all take a part in stopping the madness. Sixth, there is really a special circle of Hades, I hope, that is reserved for people who send sarcastic emails. But one of the dangers of the sarcastic email is that people don't recognize them as such. In a study at Cornell, it was discovered that even when students tried to be drippingly sarcastic on emails that they sent to other students, the sarcasm was only correctly interpreted 87% of the time. A final word on sarcasm. It comes from the Greek word for ripping flesh with your teeth. So I don't think we need to say anything more. Seventh, the email that's too casual. I would love to hear from any and all of you, but I'm David, not Dave, or Davey, or Davester. Interestingly, Will and I gave a talk at South by Southwest, that really wonderful interactive conference in Austin. And while we were there, we conducted what was a resolutely unscientific survey about what bothered people about email. And this was sort of as tech and cutting edge a group as you would find. And the interesting thing was that informality was far and away the number one complaint. People there were incredibly peeved about emails that came with inappropriately informal greetings and sign-offs. They also hated poor grammar, typos, and bad punctuation, as well as inept and non-existent subject lines. I mean, it was really interesting because it was exactly out of Lynn Truss. I mean, Lynn Truss, author of Eat, Shoots, and Leaves, would have been enormously pleased that people in this world that we imagine to be completely removed from her world are actually on the same page when it comes to how you can express yourself in writing. And finally, deadly sin number 8, the inappropriate email. When Inboxer did a study of the Enron email archive, it found that 25% of all messages sent, no, actually that's the wrong number. I think it's 25% of all messages sent by Enron employees, no, 4%. Sorry, that's a typo there. 4% of all messages sent by Enron employees were racist, sexist, pornographic, homophobic, or otherwise offensive. Clearly, at least one element of our population has turned into sort of trigger-happy shock jocks. Of course, sending offensive emails can get you fired, and that's not really such a bad thing. Now, there are lesser sins, and I'm just going to mention a few of them. Subject lines. They should live up to their billing. They should be refreshed. In a world of handhelds, they should be short. And there's the sucker punch subject line. Here's a real email that came to Will from his HR department. The subject line, in capital letters and with 6 exclamation marks, read, Memorial Day weekend holiday. And it came the Thursday before Memorial Day weekend. Very exciting. But the email itself read, the Friday before Memorial Day weekend is a full working day. If you leave early, you need to mark it as a vacation day. Wonderful. There are plenty of other minor transgressions, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of them. But before I finish, I want to make clear that we aren't just interested in what makes bad email. We're interested also in what makes good email. And here's just a brief list of a few of the qualities that Will and I like. Exclamation marks. You know, in a perfect world, we would all have time to compose such elegant emails that the language managed to express our enthusiasm. But we don't always have the time. And so when time is short, nothing gives a positive vibe as quickly as an exclamation point after an enthusiastic word. Email can dull everything down, so that even a nice word looks weak on the page. Exclamation points take these words back to where they were before. Great with an exclamation point becomes great again, not merely good. Emoticons. What can I say? They're fun. They make me smile. As a rule, you can use them with colleagues who also use them. They don't belong in formal emails. And a bar followed by a smiley face is even worse than one without. And you know, when we started on this project, you know, we really were completely anti-emoticon. It's the kind of thing that we imagined that we would leave behind in 7th grade. And as we struggled more and more to think of ways to insert tone into emails, they seemed ever more appropriate. Not for all uses, but I think any tool that you can find to, you know, add a little bit of life to your writing is a great thing to have. Angry emails. Sometimes justified, but only after you've considered all the angles carefully. And remember that your email will probably be shared, and the person you're emailing may never want to talk to you again. But if it's really important, and you really don't care, you might want to send that livid email. We have an example in the book from Larry Kramer, the playwright, who is famous for sending these angry emails. He knows exactly what he's doing. Calvin Trillin, the writer, calls them vomit-up emails. They're friends. It's meant as a positive thing. So just know what you're doing. I don't think we have a... it's interesting. I recently got one of those from Larry about something that had appeared on the op-ed page that he really hated. And I got it, and man, I just had to scrape myself off the ground because I was feeling as if somebody had just taken the flamethrower and turned it on full blast in front of me. And Will and Larry are actually very old friends. I mean, I've known them for years, but they're very, very, very close. And I called Will. Will was the first call I made, and I was practically in tears. And I said, you know, Larry sent me this thing, and he thinks the op-ed page is absolutely worthless, and it's full of garbage, and I should really just give it all up and go somewhere else. And he said, you know, ignore it. The thing is, from this guy, it's a sign of affection. The thing to realize is he always sends these emails. It's when people change their behavior patterns with emails. If all of a sudden I've had years of happy sort of Rebecca Sunnybrook Farms correspondence with someone else over 10 years, and all of a sudden I got a Larry Kramer-like email, that would really be cause for worry. But getting a Larry Kramer email from Larry Kramer, you know, you shouldn't worry about it so much. If you have a request, put it at the top. These days with so many people checking on handhelds, if it isn't on the top, it might be missed. Top posting, not bottom posting. Don't make people scroll through a long thread to find out what you have to say. Answer at the top, not the bottom. It's the equivalent of those people who leave their phone numbers at the end of long, rambling voicemails. One person in the to field, we spoke to business book author Pat Lencioni, and he described the electronic version of the freeloader effect. If you list lots of people in the to line, there's a very good chance that everyone will think someone else will do the thing, and then nobody will. The person who's supposed to respond should be a to, everyone else is a CC. Letting people know that no reply is needed. This one thing will dramatically cut down on your email. Whenever you send an informational email, remember to put no reply necessary. Your inbox will thank you. Flag-free email. We hate being told what's urgent. Is it urgent to you or is it urgent to me? Put a good subject line on your email and let your recipient decide what's urgent and what isn't. Finally, remember to get off email. Just because you were contacted on email doesn't mean you have to reply via email. Maybe we can talk about that later. In the end, it comes down to mindfulness, and as antiquated and old-fashioned as it sounds, the golden rule. Now, just tell you one last story. Last year, I walked into my office and I logged on, and I found the email from the communications director to a famous politician. And the email went like this. David, I need to know what happened to famous politician's name blanked out, peace. Why did it not run? We were clear. You said to me that it was to run the next day or the day after I sent it. This is most unusual that you would solicit a piece from famous politician, say that you liked it, told me it would run, and then never does. Best regards, communications director to famous politician. Now, I could not remember a single thing about the piece in question. And after fully absorbing the email, I of course went through the op-ed inventory. I queried my colleagues. I spent some time wondering if I was beginning to have onset middle-age memory loss. And then I figured all I could do is address the problem head-on. And so I sent an email to the communications director, apologizing if there had been a mix-up, and asking him to send the piece again. So a short while later, I received a curt reply. The reason I hadn't been able to find the piece was that it had been solicited by and submitted to another newspaper's opinion page. In other words, this guy had been entirely in the wrong. Yeah, thinking about it right now, it is still really hard to imagine a more satisfying moment. I mean, here was a great opportunity to write a completely withering email. I mean, this is what email was made for, right? There was a trail to prove one's utter rightness. There was ample time to compose the perfect razor-sharp riposte. There was even the opportunity to CC, several people and maybe BCC a few others. So what did I do? Well, in this instance, and there have been other instances where it hasn't worked out this way, the better angels of my nature took over. And I sent a don't worry email back to the guy. And believe me, I have not always acted so nobly. But the thing is, we've all had opportunities to rub people's noses in their email errors. But we've also been in the shoes of that communications director. Now, we know that there's a lot of talk about whether email is here to stay or not, whether it's a durable communication medium that will be with us forever, or it's already on its way to being obsolete. I feel, and I know Will does, that it's an incredibly useful form of communication, and I really hope it sticks around. But whether it does or doesn't, to some degree, depends on us. The less annoying we can make our emails, the more people will look forward to going through their inboxes and replying. And the more we will all continue to email each other instead of turning to another form. So our plea to everyone, let's all cut one another some slack. Email is too fluid and is evolving too rapidly for there to be a style police, and etiquette, such as it is often situational. But let's not cut each other too much slack, especially when it comes to our own behavior. It's within our reach as senders and responders to exercise greater mindfulness and awareness of what we are doing every time we send an email. There are a lot of intractable problems out there in the world, and this isn't one of them. This is actually something that we can do something about. The beautiful thing about this is that when we're more thoughtful and careful with email, people are actually inclined to be more thoughtful and careful with us. And it's remarkable the effect that it can have on your lives. Plus, fewer people are mad at us, we get more done, and we can actually look forward to opening most of the emails we receive. So I leave you with 2 thoughts. Think before you send, and send email you'd like to receive. And thanks a lot for your time. Do you want to do questions, if anybody has anything? Or advice, guidance? Yes, sir.
The strategy I figured out about 10 years ago is that no email is so important that you need to email back within 24 hours. If you do have to contact them back within 24 hours, telephone. Otherwise, the extra time gives you more time to reflect. And it always happens in the business setting. It means that the recipient think, here's a person who really thinks about what he writes. And it means that you're not under the same amount of pressure within the work environment. With friends, if you're organising a social occasion, everyone always respects that. Within a relationship, it means that you end up writing better relationship emails. I wish more people would do this.
And the thing is, too, there's also room for the interstitial email. You know, there's the one to say that I've got your email, I'm thinking about it, and I'm going to respond to what you sent me. I mean, the same thing is happening as more and more people are on handhelds, too. And, you know, a big part of email is mirroring. You know, you send me a Proustian email, and I respond back with great. You know, that's going to create friction in our relationship. But if I'm, rushing to the subway and I'm typing with my thumbs and I'm trying to get my Metro card out and I'm trying to go pick up my daughter and I'm on my handheld, having that little handheld disclaimer at the bottom is enormously useful. You know, I always used to think, as someone who, would have a very hard time wearing a polo shirt or anything that has sort of logo on it, I always thought that was sort of BlackBerry branding and that I was engaged in some sort of minor product promotion by keeping that disclaimer on. But letting people know that you are writing from that kind of a situation and that in due course you're going to send them a well-written, fully considered email that mirrors yours when you get to your desktop or you aren't rushing somewhere is enormously useful. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily occur to us that we can write back in an intermediate way to say, hey, I got this, I'm thinking about it. And you're right, it's a tremendously respectful thing to do. Sir?
That 24-hour rule may work in the same time zone, but if you call some place where the work days do not overlap, which I've had plenty of, that just does not work. You use email because you cannot phone without witchcraft.
Sir?
I like your talk, but my question is related to your autobiography. Oh. So I understand you're a well-spoken person and you wrote speeches for Clinton. So I wonder if the guy who writes speeches for Bush has any chance to work for New York Times.
Actually, he would. There was, I won't say the person, but there was a Bush speechwriter I was desperately trying to hire as a guest columnist. If you read George Bush's speeches, they're wonderfully well written. We won't get into a political discussion here, but a discussion of the craft. A Bush speech is in a way a much better read than a Clinton speech. It's interesting. Writing for Clinton, you've all heard it. He's amazing, but it is an improvisational experience. And so sometimes you'd write a Clinton speech, and he'd give the speech. Sometimes you'd write a Clinton speech and not even a preposition would overlap. Sometimes you'd write a speech, he'd read the speech, and then he'd give another speech on top of it. And you'd go hear Clinton, and it was a miraculous experience, but he would sort of take one road, and then he'd gauge the audience's reaction, he'd pull back, and he'd take another trip. And so you would go to the speech and you'd walk out of the room saying, wow, my goodness, that was a life-changing event. I'm going to go back and print out the speech so I can read about it. And then you would read the printout and you'd say, my God, I was moved by this. You know, he was talking about Egyptian mummies here, and we're on to pomegranate subsidies there. I mean, what on earth is going on? You read a George Bush speech, and it really is an elegant, well-constructed narrative. Just because he's the kind of person, I think, who sticks more to the script, or maybe has, since he gives fewer speeches, has more time to work with the speechwriters beforehand. But I'm an enormous fan of the Bush speechwriting staff. Yes?
In listing the various kinds of faults that you see or things that really annoy you in email, you left out one that is sort of my favorite to hate, which is the emails to somebody that really aren't to that person. They're actually playing to the audience.
I mean, there's so much room for deviousness. I mean, and the BCC line is really, I mean, yeah, I mean, look, you can take people's emails, you can do what Jack Abramoff did, and you can cut out words, and you can change things around. You know, it is amazing that even more mischief doesn't take place. But, you know, we tend to be good-hearted people. I mean, the BCC, we say in the book, is really the best use for the BCC line is really if you're inviting a bunch of people to a party and you don't want to share all those email addresses, putting them all in the BCC field is...
With CCs.
With, yes.
Right?
Absolutely, because you can
it's
sort
more
of...
explicit, actually.
And you can grandstand, and the whole cowardice thing comes into it too, because you can, and you CC, what happens when you CC someone's boss? You're absolutely right. Yes?
Earlier in your talk, you mentioned that talking over the phone, because there's a voice there, it clarifies more. But it seems to me with cell phones, we are moving more towards the email kind of a thing, very short sentences. And you're expected to pick up the phone anywhere you are, and you're expected to give an answer right then and there, irrespective of what you're in the middle of. So it seems like the same transition will happen with cell phone usage also, where the replies are short and communication breakdown happens.
Well, I know, I mean, you guys are kind of the experts in this. I mean, I remember being really interested in that Times Magazine story about interruptions, and that all the research being done at Microsoft in terms of what happens when you are interrupted, and how much productivity you lose, and how long it takes you to get back to your original task. And there's, you know, you guys are sort of the experts on helping people figure out how they control interruptions. I mean, the interfaces for every technology you work with are meant to inform people in one way or another when the message has arrived. Then, you know, it's up to me whether or not I'm going to check it. Am I going to look at the caller ID? Am I going to answer my cell phone? Am I going to look at my BlackBerry while I'm at my daughter's soccer game? All of these things, you know, we have, you know, we as users have some control over it. But I imagine that there are ways, too, for the technology to let you find ways to better manage your interruptions. And I think the cell phone thing is a huge thing. I think as cell phones get better and better, too, that you can actually have a real conversation on a cell phone without it breaking up halfway through. You have that BlackBerry interruption that we had today, which was kind of nightmarish. Sir?
I think, like you said, email doesn't have emotion. So that doesn't mean that because we have certain medium, we're going to use them all. It's like using all the tools in the toolbox. So we have to gauge what tool is best for the moment. So email, in my opinion, is best when you communicate stuff, or even you mentioned the flag, when it's a big thing, your big boss says, by this date, you have to do this. And I think people forget about that, right? They go into these threads. My favorite one that I hate, when you go into these threads with hundreds of people, and then someone doesn't like what the last person said, and they go back and respond to the previous message. But they cut out that answer, right?
Well, you know, it does still happen so fast. And I think, you know, if you maybe brought an evolutionary biologist in here, or someone who said that, you know, our minds haven't caught up to the dangers that are lurking. Because it's happening so fast, we lull ourselves into thinking that it's a real-time conversation in a place where you can hear my voice and I can see the expression on your face, and that we're actually really talking. And we aren't. And in a way, I don't think our brains have caught up to that fact, or we haven't done enough to sort of cultivate the mindfulness that tells us, okay, here is one zone of email where things can really go off the tracks, and here's what you should be aware of. Yes?
And I think to some extent, it's almost like we're living in a perpetual catch-22, because we're trying to make our email tools easier for people. We're adding more functionality, and people can do this and that. So they spend more time in their email application. Email application is no longer, a post box, a drop box where you just drop stuff or you pick it up. You leave there. And I'm almost like some heretical because I'm a user researcher in communications. So I've seen dozens, if not hundreds, of people who live and die by Outlook. They use their file folders, they store their files there, they never go outside Outlook space. And we are kind of beating that because we're increasing functionality of email. You can do this, that, and that. So we are creating that space for them to make lots of mistakes. Those cultural and psychological mistakes by making the tools more functional and more complex on one hand and more easy to use on the other. Where's the way out?
I mean, do you think with IM people are going to make even more mistakes? I mean, does everything get sort of speeded?
No, we're making IM too much. Email is complexity, and IM voice now think it's all thing. The story repeats itself.
The next book's going to be about IM.
So I'm just thinking, is there a way out?
That's in some measure up to you guys. But from a writer's perspective, there has to be a way to make ourselves aware of what can go. I mean, how could the people at the Justice Department not be aware that they were dealing with a relatively permanent, indelible communications technology? And yet there are so many ways, because we're talking about it goes so fast, that you think because it came to you in the blink of an eye, and you can send it in the blink of an eye, it's going to last for 2 blinks of an eye. And that's just not the case. Or you look at, so much of email happens automatically. I mean, there are all these default things. You've got to, from, BCC, CC, subject line. Now, sometimes, you guys have a prompt, do you want to fill in your subject line, which is a very useful thing, which kind of reawakens you to the fact that the subject line is there. But for most people, it's like lawn furniture. You just walk by. It's like, you come to Microsoft on your first day you're working here, and you're incredibly excited, and you notice every detail, and you see the colas in the fridge, and you see the coffee machine, and you see all those things. And you probably keep noticing them for about a week or so, but you're here for 10 years, and do you see them in the same way, to the extent that you even see them? And I don't think you do. And the same thing is with this whole top of an email that contains all these minefields, and yet it just lulls you into not thinking about it, which is why I think the subject line prompt is really good.
Regarding the nastiness that we all experience from time to time, we've all been on the receiving end of it, probably also dished out, that we don't see in one-on-one communication. I hate to ask this, but I'm going to anyway. Do you think that we're actually seeing people's unvarnished selves at that point that normally is covered up by a nice social veneer? Or is it just purely carelessness?
No, I do think in an interesting way that you do have sort of a window into the id. And so, I got an interesting question from a woman who was writing something for Southern booksellers. And she's a really wonderful novelist, but she's asking sort of about what sort of historical trove. I mean, she sort of thought that letters were really the best kind of historical documents. If you're a historian, you're wanting to cobble together a view of the past. And the fact is, email, because it is sort of our unvarnished self, gives you, in a way, sort of a deeper snapshot of the culture. I mean, if you think, when you're writing a letter, there were so many opportunities for your superego to kick in. I mean, you had to write the thing, you had to fold it, you had to put it in an envelope, you had to address it, you had to put a stamp on it, you had to go to the mailbox. There were a dozen opportunities to slow yourself down. And there really aren't as many opportunities with email. Even if you write your scorching email in a Word document, or if you don't fill in a name in the to line, there's still that, that send key or whatever send key you have on there is like a giant tractor beam, and somehow it's just pulling your hand ever closer, and you're just asking for disaster.
Yeah, well, you can think before you hit send. I learned how to do that because I had to deal with a lot of executive email and send these responses that would either cost my job or make my job. So I would write the whole thing, read again, then say, leave it there, go away, have lunch, come back, read it again, add it a little more, until I was really sure that I was really being effective, and at the same time I wasn't creating problems. So I think it's too easy. Right?
And that's why you're working at Microsoft. I mean, it's there are a lot of people who simply don't do that. I mean, I think we've all had experience, and there have certainly been times when I haven't done that, especially in an emotional email, and you get caught up in this eye for an eye communication, and you get in the heat of the moment, and it is enormously hard to get up from your chair and not send that email. It's hard enough to get up from your chair, much less to go offline and find another way to sort out the problem. Sir?
Yeah. When working across the time zone problem, the CC and BCC is a very useful weapon. My modus operandi, although it was fax, was to send email to David, copy boss of David. No reply, complain to boss of David, copy boss of David. It does not make friends, but it influences people.
I'm sure it would be interesting to see what happens when you and David get into the room together, because
yes,
I think
we're not friendly. These were the guys that always the faxes disappeared on the way to their offices.
Yes.
I like what he said about email is so important that you have to respond within 24 hours. But at Microsoft, and I think most big corporations, there's unspoken understanding that you would respond to most emails within the same workday. That's why people would have an out-of-office message when they are in a long meeting or day-long training or something, which is, in general, not really all that necessary. So do you have any ideas for changing that unspoken assumption?
I'm a huge fan of the out-of-office message, even when you're in meetings for a day or something like that. And it's interesting, I went on vacation a couple of weeks ago, and somehow I had screwed up my out-of-office response. A couple of observations came out. It was a useful reminder as you're going to talk about a book on email to make a really boneheaded email mistake just before you do it. But the urgency, or the increasing urgency of the responses, email number 1, email number 2, where are you? Email number 3, really, where are you? Email number 4, are you mad at me? The other thing that was really interesting about that is that I had no voicemails. I had managed to successfully change my voicemail message, but people weren't calling. People were carrying this out online. They weren't saying, okay, I'm going to call David and then I get the message, or I'm going to leave a message. It was all, they weren't thinking to go outside that box. And that to me was really surprising.
For the out-of-office message, it's expected that you would have, people that other people could ask questions, redirects essentially, because it's still expected that people's questions would be answered within the same day, which I think is a little bit of an over-the-top expectation.
Well, what do you think? Would there be a technological prompt, or how would you change that?
I think a lot of it would be a cultural change, because there are things that need answers in the same day, and there are channels that need that, but a lot of us don't need to provide that kind of answer in the same days. Like what you guys said, more thoughtful responses would be actually better. Whereas, here people just kick rounds of emails within 30 minutes, and then it's all unnecessary because of something else.
That's where specificity really comes in, and taking an extra couple of minutes to ask a precise question. That way you can tell the difference. What this gentleman was saying too, I think it is flattering and considerate and nice to say, I've got your email, I'm going to think about it. For the shorter things that you can, what time is lunch in the cafeteria? 1, the clearer you are in terms of what you're asking that person, the clearer the response is going to be, the fewer hours you're going to be spending going back and forth. So if we can work or reach for that clarity, especially because you have that whole Bob Geldof thing where it is very satisfying, just going on and on. You think you're actually doing something when in fact you aren't. And anything you can do to remove yourself from that culture of sort of going around and around on the habit trail is better. And I hope, maybe this book will raise some of those questions, or that there will be something else that prompts a discussion to figure out what the rules are for this thing that really just sort of showed up on our doorstep one day and took over our lives, and nobody really taught us how to use it.
Well, I think what you mentioned about earlier, it's great. If you cannot, don't talk, right? And so on and so forth, like the rest of the same. And a lot of people think they have to respond to email just because it's there. And as you mature, I think, into your company's culture, and you think, I don't have to do anything. I'll just sit. I'm not going to get them. Yep. They're throwing me a bone to see if I can. So unless it is an action from your boss, Johnny, reply to this by XX, I need this information, or things like that. Otherwise, why respond? I don't even check email before going to bed anymore, because I used to go before like 11:30, 12 o'clock, check email, then it would get me into thinking, and people are sending these silly emails but raising issues late at night. I said, why did I read that email? Now I'm going to take me another hour to unwind. So I just, by 9:30, I say, I'm done, that's it. Unless if it's really important, they're going to call me.
Yeah.
But it's really amazing.
Wait, one more question.
Yeah.
So I actually think you've got the wrong answer, and I think the BlackBerry email you sent from the Metro is bad. Every email you send before 24 hours trains your peers and your colleagues to expect rapid emails, and then the first one that comes that is not within that time limit, they think something's wrong. But gradually, if you never respond to any of them within 24 hours, they'll come to think, right, he generally doesn't, and they'll respect you for that, and they won't expect you in the future to do it. And I think that answers your question a lot.
I think it does depend on your job, though. I would lose my job. I mean, for the op-ed, newspaper, if I'm not back to someone, and there's news, and the paper closes at 6:30, it's sort of game over. I either get the piece in the shooting in, or I don't get it, or the writer doesn't hear back from me within an hour, and he or she goes to the Wall Street Journal, or the Washington Post, or the LA Times. But you're absolutely right. It would be great if you could do more to sort of cultivate spheres of response, where there are certain people who are accustomed and trained, because we do train people with our emails that, okay, this is a reasonable time. I got your email. I'm back to you within 24 hours. I mean, it used to be 24 hours for a phone call, or for most phone calls. Why can't it be that for email? The problem is, as better and better technologies come along, some of which come from here, that are faster, swifter, more efficient. I mean, you can really feel sort of IM, pushing and pushing and pushing. I mean, it's going to make email in a way seem like a letter, in a sense that it's you against everything else. It's tough.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's really a blast.